In this video, we will talk about how to configure IP and MAC address binding on Sangfor and Jive. Application scenarios. When you want to configure user bind to IP or MAC address or bind the MAC address when the Jive device is connected to the layer 3 switch, you can configure IP and MAC address binding. In this configuration, we will need to prepare one Jive device and one PC. Deploy the network environment to ensure that the PC can access Jive and ensure that the data of the PC will pass through Jive. If the internet user is bind to the MAC address and the Jive device is connected to the layer 3 switch, you need to configure obtain MAC by SNMP on Jive. There are two basic methods for configuring IP and MAC address binding on Sangfor and Jive. 1. Through the authentication policy. 2. Through creating local user manually. In this video, we will demonstrate on how to configure IP and MAC address binding on Sangfor and Jive. The picture shown here is our sample topology for this tutorial. Firstly, we will demonstrate the first method, which is through the authentication policy. Go to Authentication System, Local Users, Users. We can see that there is no local user yet in Jive. Next, go to External Authentication, Policy. Click on Enable User Authentication to configure authentication policy. Select the appropriate authentication zone to authenticate against with. In this tutorial, we are authenticating against the PC and LAN, so we will select the LAN zone. Click on Add to add new authentication policy. By default, there will be a default policy available. We will be using this default policy to configure IP and MAC address binding. Click on the default policy. Select the authentication method that you wish. We will be selecting None SSO. Select Add to specified local group and select the group you wish to add the local user into. Tick on Bind IP/MAC. There are two binding mode available, which are bidirectional and unidirectional respectively. For bidirectional binding, this user can only use the specified address, which can only be used by this user. For unidirectional binding, this user can only use the specified address, which can also be used by other user. In this tutorial, we will be selecting bidirectional binding. Select Bind the IP and MAC on initial logon. After done settings, click OK. Until here, the configuration for configuring IP and MAC address binding through authentication policy has been done. Authenticated users will be automatically added to the group we selected just now. Now, go to Status, Online Users. We can see that the PC has been authenticated. Go back to Authentication System, Local Users, Users to check the added users. We can see that the PC has been added as a local user in Jive. Click on it to view more detail. From here, we can see that the user has been bound with IP and MAC address. This concludes the first method, configuring IP and MAC address binding through authentication policy. Secondly, we will demonstrate the second method, which is through creating local user manually. Go to Authentication System, Local Users, Users. Click on Add to add new user. Fill in the name. Tick Bind IP/MAC address. Select the binding mode. Select IP and MAC. Move the cursor to the icon to see supported format. Configure the IP and MAC address. You can also select to scan MAC to get the MAC address of the PC. After done settings, click OK. From here, we can see that the new user has been added. Click on it to view more detail. This concludes the second method, configuring IP and MAC address binding through creating local user manually. If the intranet user is bound to the MAC address and the NGIF device is connected to the layer 3 switch, you need to configure Obtain MAC by SNMP on NGIF. Go to Authentication System, External Authentication, Options, Obtain MAC by SNMP. Click on Enable SNMP Settings. Click on Add button to add the Layer 3 switch IP. In this tutorial we do not have Layer 3 switch, so we do not need to add it. Precautions. If the intranet user is bound to the MAC address and the NGIF device is connected to the Layer 3 switch, you need to configure Obtain MAC by SNMP on NGIF. If the user exists, automatic binding needs to delete the original user or manually rebind it. In the end of this tutorial, we have learned on how to configure IP and MAC address binding through authentication policy, how to configure IP and MAC address binding through creating local user manually, how to configure Obtain MAC by SNMP on NGIF.